Ash spiraled down like soft snowfall, though there was nothing soft about it. Radioactive embers from what had once been an agricultural dome drifted through the blood-orange haze of Verelion's eternally scorched sky. The twin suns hovered low, filtered by perpetual dust clouds, their dim light casting jagged shadows across the rubble-strewn terrain. Smoke bled from fissured soil, mingling with the acrid stench of oxidized metal and scorched alien flora. Somewhere distant, artillery groaned one final time before silence settled like a shroud over the no-man's land. It was a silence earned only by annihilation. Taren Voss emerged from behind a shattered chassis of what used to be a mobile shield crawler. His gear was patched, his vest faded to indistinct greens and browns, and his pulse rifle dangled loosely in one hand, half because he was tired, half because there was no one left to aim it at. His boots crunched on ground that was no longer earth, but fused rock and powdered armor. Around him, the battlefield was a mosaic of broken hulls, decaying banners, and abandoned mechs twisted into grotesque sculptures of war. Not even the scavenger drones had survived this front. A low ping echoed in his neural HUD. Something biological still pulsed to the west, weak, irregular, and buried beneath layers of collapsed structure. His boots moved before his thoughts caught up. It wasn't the first time he chased after a phantom reading on this dying planet, but something in the signal's cadence clawed at his instincts. It was too human to ignore, yet entirely wrong in rhythm. He picked his way down a slope of loose composite and slipped between the warped ribs of a burned-out command trench. The debris groaned beneath his steps. A ruined bioscanner flickered uselessly above a shattered blast door, and beyond it, in a pocket of half-light and dust-mote shadows, something stirred. It wasn't human. The silhouette was distinctly alien, slender, elongated limbs bent unnaturally, one arm twisted beneath the weight of collapsed girders. Her skin shimmered under the layer of grime and ash, a deep emerald green veined with faint pulses of internal bioluminescence. Her hair, impossibly silver, lay tangled across her face like fine metal threads. Her suit, once sleek black and tactical, was shredded and fused in places, revealing burns, lacerations, and dried alien ichor. A breath escaped her lips, rasping, shallow, but alive. Taren knelt beside her, the neural HUD, identifying microfractures in her bones, an energy weapon, scoring along her ribs. Verelion's gravity would have worsened the internal bleeding. Her vitals flickered like a storm-rattled candle. She didn't register his presence beyond a weak twitch of a hand. No threat, no reaction, just stubborn survival. She should have been left. She was the enemy, one of the Iron Concord's embedded field operatives. Her biometric tags were still active beneath the wreckage of her comms collar. Extraction was unnecessary. Orders were clear: contain, recover, or leave. And yet, his hand moved without hesitation, brushing grit from her face, adjusting her breathing mask, sealing the worst wound with a self-administered gel pack. In that touch, something shifted. Her body reacted almost imperceptibly to the warmth in his glove. Her breath stuttered into a more stable rhythm, not just physiological. Her kind weren't built to receive mercy. It was not in their battle algorithms to expect kindness. And Taren had not delivered it as strategy. It was instinct. A moment that made no military sense, but realigned everything. Her eyes fluttered open, violet beneath the layer of ash, unfocused, pained questioning. She didn't speak. Couldn't. But their eyes locked for a moment too long, a fraction of eternity, where species war and loyalty dissolved into something raw and wordless. He hoisted her body into his arms. She was feather-light but angular, her physiology denser than human, yet built for agility. Her skin was cooler than expected, soft but taut, with muscular tension. Every step he took away from that trench was an abandonment of the war and a silent declaration of something more powerful than duty. The dusk around them deepened. The field fell away behind him, swallowed by dust and ruin. Carrying her through that ruined threshold, Taren Voss did not realize that the decision had already rewritten the future. Each step away from the battlefield pulled him deeper into territory, both dangerous and uncharted. The terrain was no friend, collapsing towers of alien alloy, rivers of chemically scorched glass, and scattered remnants of forgotten skirmishes littered the way forward. Storms rolled lazily across the horizon, churning up ionized particles that sparked against the magnetic netting woven through his cloak. The gravity fluctuations in this region made movement inconsistent, but he kept her steady in his arms, shifting her weight whenever her breathing faltered. She stirred occasionally, a flicker of awareness in muscles not yet ready to obey. At one point, her fingers curled faintly against his vest, not in protest or fear, but in some involuntary gesture of anchoring an instinctive reach for something solid. He didn't speak. There was no one to answer. Words felt thin in a world that had already choked on diplomacy and propaganda. They moved through an abandoned housing complex where shattered window panes still caught echoes of voices from another time. Taren scavenged for shelter, settling on a partially intact structure with shielding walls and a stable roof. The interior was dark and rank with mold, but it would do. A broken med station flickered in one corner, its diagnostic arm rusted in place. He lowered her onto a cot and activated a portable scan field. The results confirmed what his field analysis had suggested. 4 fractured ribs, a partially collapsed lung sac, deep tissue lacerations, and a subdermal tracker linked to a conquered reconnaissance relay. That had to go. With practiced precision, he used his fusion blade to extract the node cauterizing the wound before sealing it with hydrogel. Her body jerked once, a low exhalation escaping her lips like wind through a broken vent. From his ration pouch, he retrieved nutrient paste, modifying the dispenser to interface with her physiology. Her throat convulsed weakly as the substance slid down the nourishment, jump-starting her system. Her skin responded subtly, the bioluminescent veins growing steadier in pulse. It was a strange kind of intimacy, tending to someone built so differently, watching her body respond to alien nourishment with reluctant acceptance. He checked her pulse again, felt the faint rhythm under his fingers. Her skin had a texture like fine suede, smooth but faintly ridged, resilient, adaptive. He found himself studying the curve of her collarbone, the way her hair shimmered in fractured light. Not desire. Not curiosity. Something quieter. Recognition, perhaps, of the life she represented in a world where life had become rare. That night, Taren slept with one eye open, his rifle beside him, her body within arm's reach in case her condition worsened or in case she awoke not so grateful. But she didn't attack. She didn't run. She slept suspended between worlds, between loyalties, between extinction and rebirth. By the 3rd day, she was moving on her own, silent at first, observing. Her gait was uneven but precise. She adapted quickly to his presence, tracking his movements with a tactician's focus. She watched how he salvaged water from broken pipes, how he filtered radiation through mesh he'd welded together from drone husks. She saw how he repaired broken ration packs using repurposed biosleeves and how he always gave her the larger portion. She began to assist in small ways, stabilizing structural beams before they moved deeper, warning him of loose shale near collapsed stairwells, pointing to the sky with 2 fingers when she heard sonic anomalies. She communicated with gestures short and efficient, and he answered in kind. There was a rhythm forming like a dance they'd never rehearsed but somehow knew by instinct. During one detour into an old solar relay station, she stumbled against a collapsed strut. He caught her reflexively, one arm curling under her waist, the other around her shoulders. For a heartbeat, she didn't pull away. Her body rested against his like it had found a familiar alignment. Her head tilted slightly toward his chest, where his heart beat steadily beneath dust-streaked armor. Later that day, when the temperature dropped, he wrapped his cloak around them both as they sat beneath the remains of a kinetic shielding arch. She accepted the gesture without hesitation, their shoulders pressed together, sharing warmth in a landscape that had forgotten such things. The air was thick with ozone and silence. One night, as acid rain hissed against their makeshift shelter, she took his hand for the first time, not as a plea, not as an act of weakness, simply a quiet statement, "I am still here." He didn't question why he let her. There was no logic to what they were building, just shared hunger, exhaustion, and the knowledge that their survival had become entangled. By the time they crossed the scarred expanse of the forward barrens, their movements were synchronized. He would reach for a weapon before she pointed. She would duck before he adjusted fire. No words, no confirmation, just mutual understanding carved by fire and silence. She was no longer just someone he had saved. She was a partner, a shadow in sync with his own, and somewhere buried deep in the fiber of that companionship, something unfamiliar was taking root. Something they both knew better than to name. The winds over the barrens had grown sharper, slicing across exposed skin with crystalline precision. The terrain grew stranger as they pressed north, structures built before the war, or perhaps before the first colonial surveys began to rise from the stone like half-remembered relics of a different species' ambition. Towering pylons of fused metal jutted at impossible angles, humming with dormant energy. Between them lay corridors choked in blue moss and glittering fungal networks that pulsed faintly when disturbed. Taren noticed the change in her first. Elyra's balance became fluid, more attuned. Her gaze lingered on details others would miss. Minor shifts in magnetic fields, soundless vibrations beneath their boots. She began tracing symbols with her fingers on exposed terminals, unlocking sealed partitions without access codes. Whatever her history, she belonged to this place in some buried way. The landscape wasn't just terrain to her, it was inheritance. They reached a ravine where a comms tower had collapsed over an access hatch embedded into the cliffside. Under the twisted wreckage lay a circular seal etched in concentric rings, faintly pulsing in rhythm with the ground. It responded to neither voice command nor interface. Taren reached toward it but stopped when Elyra stepped forward. She pressed her hand to the outermost ring. The seal scanned her skin with a flicker of white light, then pulsed blue. She looked at him then, as if unsure what would follow. He stepped beside her, laid his hand over hers. A second pulse. White and blue merged, then exploded outward in a corona of electric resonance. The seal rotated open with a sound like ancient breath escaping stone. The stairs descended into darkness. Automated lights flickered awake one by one, illuminating a corridor that descended beneath the Earth's bones. The air was sterile and strangely warm. Vents whispered. Glassy walls bore ancient inscriptions and diagrams, some recognizable as early Dominion tech, others far older. They found the chamber at the terminus of the corridor. It wasn't just a med bay, it was a genetic sanctum. Rows of dormant pods lined the walls, their containment glass long clouded by time. A single pod pulsed with residual power at the center, larger, more intricate, and etched with biological symbology. Its readout flickered erratically as Taren approached. He scanned it, jaw tightening. The system recognized hybrid signatures, 2 inputs required. Single-user repair was impossible. She had already moved to his side. Her gaze swept across the control interface, then rested on the biometric fields that awaited entry. Her breathing slowed, not from hesitation, but calculation. He knew without asking. This wasn't just healing, it was merging. A shared interface, a fusion of biology and cognition, an irreversible act. Elyra stepped into the chamber first, allowing its tendrils to scan her structure, her blood, her genome. The system accepted her. It flickered, shifted, and waited. Taren followed. The moment the chamber sealed around them, the world outside vanished. Bioluminescent filaments slid over their skin, cool featherlight, and disturbingly aware. A low hum filled the space between them. Their bodies floated suspended in dense fluid that conducted memory and thought like electricity. Sensors penetrated beneath their skin, threading through muscle and synapse. Taren felt the moment his nervous system touched hers like a second heartbeat echoing through his chest. Not his own. A stranger's rhythm. A cadence both alien and strangely comforting. His mind opened. He saw pieces of her life. Training beneath blue suns, speaking languages without sound, swimming through gas oceans that shaped her lungs differently. He saw fear. She never showed shame, she buried duty that haunted her. She saw his world. A dirt farm in orbit around a forgotten moon. Running through rusted wind turbines. The moment he volunteered for special ops because he had nothing else left. The burn of guilt when his squad didn't return. They felt each other. Past the images, past the stories, the unspoken truth beneath choices. Not just understanding, but becoming. The chamber vibrated with energy. Their cells rewrote themselves. Mitochondria folded into new structures. Genetic strands intertwined in shimmering helix spirals, combining fragments to create a new code, a hybrid genome not yet seen in either species. Their muscles twitched in harmony, heart rates synchronized. Skin tones shifted, his warmer hers glowing faintly in tandem. The fusion was not invasive, it was intimate, a merging of pain memory, purpose, and potential. When the pod finally unsealed hours or minutes later, time having blurred into molecular rhythm, they stepped out, not as two strangers, but as one unit. He stood straighter. Her eyes burned brighter. Their bodies carried traces of each other, his scent on her skin, her reflexes in his stance. The neural link had faded, but left a residue. They could feel each other in the air, like gravity between twin planets. She looked down at her abdomen, her fingers resting lightly on the spot just below her ribs. Something inside her pulsed, faint but new. He didn't need to ask. The chamber had chosen a path beyond repair. It had chosen continuation. The hybrid bond had done more than save them. It had begun a future. The air outside the chamber tasted different, crisper, charged, as if the planet itself had paused to acknowledge their transformation. Taren and Elyra emerged into the open breath, synchronizing instinctively with the faint hum, now present at the edge of their hearing, residual resonance from the biotechnological imprint still knitting their bodies in microscopic silence. The sky had darkened while they were underground. Varelian's twin suns dipped below the fractured skyline, replaced by a pale luminescence from the planet's moons, whose light bathed the ruins in a kind of fragile serenity. But peace here never lasted. Movement flared on Taren's tactical display. Heat signatures, multiple, closing fast. Their perch atop the ravine gave them a sweeping view of the landscape below. Once a conquered transport hub, now nothing but twisted hulls and sand-choked roads. Emerging from the southern pass, the Ravun raiders crept through shadows, dozens of them maneuvering with predatory efficiency. They wore scavenged armor fused with living tech, spike-tipped exoskeletons wired directly into neural ports. Each step they took thudded into the ground like the war drum of a forgotten god. Taren adjusted the power settings on his rifle. Elyra reached for a fallen drone, pried loose a neuroblade module, and integrated it seamlessly into her wrist gauntlet. The hybrid enhancements responded immediately, color shifting into active camouflage, temperature, regulating reflex nodes, tightening across the backs of their necks like warning tendrils. They didn't speak, no need. The links still whispered in pulses, guiding their motions with pre-verbal clarity. They dropped down the ravine as one. He moved left, she shifted right, each anticipating the other's angle of attack before it was needed. Taren took out the first raider from above, a clean blast through the spinal node. Elyra swept beneath a descending mech drone, disabling its stabilizer with a flick of her modded blade. Sparks burst like fireworks into the dusk. The raiders reacted too slowly. Their formations faltered as the two carved paths through them like twin blades of thought. Taren's aim became preternatural, guided by her sensory instincts. He felt her reactions before she made them, his body adjusting mid-stride to give her cover without thinking. Elyra spun through combat like a living storm, eyes glowing with genetic memory, reading her enemies through angles, tension smell. Together they fought with the precision of an algorithm and the passion of myth. More raiders poured in. One of them unleashed a subsonic shriek that staggered lesser minds. Elyra winced blood at her ears, but Taren caught her before she stumbled. With his augmented lungs, he screamed back a short, explosive exhale that shattered the attacker's chest cavity. His voice wasn't just human anymore. It carried something deeper, resonating in frequencies that hadn't belonged to his species until hours ago. As the battlefield grew dense with bodies and fire, they seized the advantage. Elyra activated a buried turret array, once part of a long-dead outpost. Taren rerouted its targeting AI using biometric overrides they both now shared. The machine whirred to life, recognizing them not as intruders, but as inheritors. Red tracer lines stitched through the raiders' advance, buying time for a countermaneuver. They moved like a symphony. He throwing plasma charges, she detonating fields of magnetic interference, their timing always perfect. Every shared glance was a sentence. Every step was choreography. They had become a unit, not just in combat, but in existence. At one point, Taren was hit. A raider's clawed projectile buried itself in his thigh. Pain flashed red through his nerves, and the feedback loop surged toward her. She felt it not as injury, but as urgency. Elyra pivoted, mid-run, leapt from a wrecked beam and brought her blade down in a clean arc that severed the attacker's limbs from its body. Taren caught her glance in the chaos. No fear, no plea, just the mutual agreement: keep going. She helped him stand. He limped. She adjusted. They moved forward. The final wave fell beneath a magnetic spike trap, reactivated from an old defense array Taren had rewired days ago. The Earth swallowed a dozen raiders at once, leaving nothing but a humming crater and smoke. Silence returned heavy and abrupt. Bodies steamed. The air tasted of ozone and blood. Above them, the moons cast their pale judgment over the scorched terrain. Taren's heart pounded, each beat sinking with Elyra's through the invisible thread that now tethered them. Their armor bore the battle like a second skin, scorched, smeared, but proud. They stood at the center of what had once been a kill zone. Now it was theirs. Not far off, the remnants of an old broadcast tower blinked to life, unbidden. One of Elyra's tools must have reconnected it through proximity resonance. A soft transmission burst through the static, a relay ping from the scattered colonies nearby. The battle hadn't just secured a position. It had lit a beacon. Others would come. They had become more than soldiers, more than survivors. They were a signal now, a living frequency of resistance. The message spread faster than anticipated. From shattered colonies still hidden beneath cracked moons to underground enclaves running on fossilized hopes, the signal broadcasted by the revived tower carried more than coordinates, it carried proof. Proof that resistance hadn't just survived, it had evolved. That somewhere on Varelian's desolate skin, two beings once enemies had turned death into defense, scarcity into renewal. Taren and Elyra stood at the edge of the old Concord overlook, staring down at the basin now marked by a scorched perimeter of destroyed Ravun armor. The ground bore new scars, but beneath them something stirred, roots of vegetation beginning to breach through. The battle hadn't just cleared the air, it had disturbed the ancient infrastructure slumbering beneath. In the days that followed, settlers began arriving, first in 2s and 3s, then in whole families. Some limped in on makeshift hovercrafts. Others on foot, guided by whispers, carried through the old pirate radio bands. They were gaunt, hollow-eyed, wrapped in radiation-sealed cloaks, but their hands carried tools. Their eyes carried purpose. They found a haven being born not from doctrine or command, but from the rhythm between two hearts that had no reason to trust and did anyway. Among them was Ravaged, an elder from the Methane clans. He knelt on one knee before Taren and offered a wrapped bundle, seeds engineered before the war, long thought inert. Behind him, Nisarel, a scaled youth with iridescent skin and a broken wrist terminal, carried schematics for atmospheric filters salvaged from orbital trash. They brought pieces of the past, not to revive the old world, but to birth a better one. What had been a ruin became a blueprint. What had been a skirmish became a rally point. They called it Voss's Reach, not because Taren demanded it, but because the name began to appear scrawled on scavenged panels etched onto tools whispered during rest shifts by those who remembered what it meant to be fed, defended, and seen. The fusion core beneath the sanctum still pulsed, and from it, Elyra coaxed the forgotten terraforming grid to life. She and Nissa rerouted its functions through the hybrid interface left behind by the resonance chamber. The soil began to change. Where once only blood could seep, water followed. Where ash choked roots, green tendrils unfurled. But the Iron Conquered had long memories and wide surveillance. The syndicate that funded the Ravun raiders would not ignore such a rupture in their monopoly. And Commander Raz had not forgotten Taren Voss. Not after what had happened during the campaign on Tolnaris III, where a failed extraction led to the loss of 3 conquered carriers. Raz had worn his scars like medals since, but it was vengeance that kept him breathing. When his flagship breached Varelian's atmosphere, its shadow swept across the canyon like a closing fist. It was a warship not made for diplomacy, sleek, angular, covered in kinetic shielding and disruption arrays. Alongside it came 2 assault cruisers, smaller, faster, armed with ground suppression turrets and hull-piercing drills. The settlers didn't run. They built barricades from old engine cores. Deflection screens using repurposed miner drones, signal scramblers powered by solar arrays stolen from a museum ruin. Ravik organized the clans. Nissa trained the children to calibrate defense turrets. Taren moved among them like a phantom commander, adjusting targeting ranges, teaching them how to breathe through fear. Elyra oversaw the integration of the replicator grid with the new aquaponics scaffolds. Each meal distributed was laced with enhanced nutrient profiles. The same that had sustained her and Taren through the escape, now calibrated to fortify immune systems, stimulate synaptic clarity, and increase tissue regeneration. It wasn't food, it was foundation. When Ray's drop pods hit the upper rim, the skies bled. Settlers activated the defense grid. Ion cannons surged from the earth, punching holes through the descending hulls. But it wasn't enough. Taren returned to the sanctum blood on his forearms and activated the secondary array, a sequence buried in the bunker's side systems. Elyra joined him, interfacing directly through the neural splice at the base of her spine, the residue from their chamber bonds still shimmering faintly beneath her skin. The terraforming grid flared. It didn't just change the soil, it changed the physics. Localized gravity wells bloomed like blooming stars. Ray's ships were pulled sideways, their stabilizers screaming as hulls twisted under gravitational duress. 2 dropships crumpled midair. The third landed, disgorging mercenaries in composite armor designed to resist biological warfare. But the mercenaries hadn't eaten Voss's food. The settlers had. Ravik, once hunched and trembling, wielded an old vibro-staff like a warlord reborn. Nissa coordinated a synchronized EMP burst that took down 3 assault mechs mid-charge. Children ran messages without fear, their lungs filled with recombinant oxygen rich from the fresh fields. Taren and Elyra fought at the front line, not as symbols, but as catalysts. Their weapons spoke in harmony. Their movements mirrored. Where he swept wide, she cut in tight. Where she hesitated, he pressed forward. Ray's elite broke upon them like waves on iron. At the heart of the storm, Elyra's abdomen burned faintly. Not pain, not weakness, life. Something nested within her, quiet and strong, watching the world its parents were shaping. And far above, a new signal blinked into existence. The Solar Dominion cruiser had arrived, pulled from silence by a beacon they had not expected to receive an encoded genetic frequency only readable by command. Taren's. The voice that came through the static was one he hadn't heard in years. Commander Arden Vale. She offered extraction, cleansing, reintegration. He declined. What they had here was more than rebellion, more than survival. It was future. Voss's reach held. The ash-stained skies of Varelion began to break apart. Not all at once, not with grandeur, but with slow, persistent defiance. The terraforming algorithms buried beneath the soil had begun to activate in earnest, reshaping microclimates, rebalancing humidity layers, and neutralizing decades of atmospheric rot. The days grew longer, the blood-orange light tinged now with flickers of truer color sunlight that filtered without distortion. At the center of it all stood Voss's Reach. No longer a temporary camp, no longer a barricade village. It had transformed into a living organism. Modular habitats grown out of hybridized mycelial structures, energy towers clothed in living vines that conducted solar absorption far more efficiently than any Dominion tech. Children now raced through corridors where once only battle maps existed. Food no longer came from ration packs, but from stacked gardens irrigated by melted condensers and filtered through Elyra's redesigned nutrient web. Taren walked the perimeter daily, not to patrol. Not because he feared return strikes, though Raz's fractured forces still sent desperate probes. He walked because the rhythm of it anchored him, the pulse of his boots against regrown soil, a reminder that permanence had replaced wandering. Every now and then, settlers would nod to him, call him chief or founder, or simply Voss. He never corrected them, ever. Elyra spent her mornings in the central biospire. The life growing inside her was strong reactive. It shifted with her moods. Sometimes it pulsed warmly at the sound of her voice. Other times it responded to Taren's presence from across a room, tiny flutters of motion that aligned with his breath. The chamber's residual link had left something permanent. The child was not merely a hybrid. It was a singularity, both bridge and beacon. Word of their victory spread far beyond Varelion's orbit. From the outer belts came emissaries, ex-Solar Dominion scouts, disgruntled, conquered defectors, unregistered terraformers, all drawn by rumors of a sanctuary where biology and memory had created not just a future, but a philosophy. They brought tools, data cores, relics, and they asked not for leadership, but for instruction. How did you make this? How do we become like you? Taren had no doctrine to give. Elyra had no sermons to preach. Instead, they opened their doors and let others witness it for themselves. A world where difference was not diluted, but harmonized. Where old code was rewritten by compassion, and where strength came from integration, not hierarchy. 6 months after the final defense, a ripple passed through the biogrids. not a threat. A signal. The gravitational disruptor buried in the ancient sanctum, long thought spent, had recharged through passive ambient absorption. Elyra theorized it had stabilized through hybrid feedback, adapting to her child's neural field even before birth. They no longer needed weapons to destroy ships. They had unknowingly created a planetary firewall coded to a heartbeat. Ardenvale returned once, descending from her Dominion cruiser in full formal armor. She walked the edge of the settlement like someone visiting a myth, speaking little, observing much. When she met Taren and Elyra again, she made no reference to the orders he had defied, nor the syndicate strongholds he had razed through non-sanctioned bioweapon activation. She simply offered a treaty. Voss's reach would be marked as autonomous, protected, observed, not governed. She asked one question before departing. "What will you call this movement?" Elyra answered without pause. She placed Taren's hand gently atop her womb and replied with a single word: resonance. The seasons changed. Real seasons for the first time in decades. Winds carried pollen instead of ash. Light filtered through canopy leaves thick enough to cast shadows that danced across children's faces. In the evenings, Taren and Elyra would sit atop the overlook, sharing silent glances, hands intertwined. Their love was not cinematic. It had not arrived with orchestration or ceremony. It had been forged under fire in ruined trenches and within fusion chambers not meant for intimacy. It was a love born of necessity, refined by pain and crystallized by choice. It had no shape but the world it built. When the child came, she bore eyes the color of twilight and skin that shimmered between shades like the edge of atmosphere. Her cry was soft, her breath steady. Elyra named her Kaelin, a name with no direct translation, but meaning loosely the one who bridges light and language. Taren built her a cradle from alloy and moss, and one day, years from that first encounter, she would walk the fields that had once been battle zones and press her hand against the soil, activating memories, not written in blood, but in hope. Thank you for experiencing this full-length HFY sci-fi tale, After the Apocalypse. His food stall has everything, reimagined. Across 6 chapters, we journeyed with Taren Voss and Elyra Kael, 2 survivors from opposite sides of war, who chose trust over instinct, resonance over resistance. Their bond didn't just heal wounds, it rewrote the rules of survival, reshaped a dying planet, and ignited a movement built on synthesis, not supremacy. From broken battlefields to biofusion sanctuaries, from scavenged meals to terraformed futures, this story reminds us that sometimes the smallest act of kindness, feeding a stranger, can ripple outward into cosmic transformation. If this story moved you, inspired you, or sparked your imagination, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support this channel. Tell us your favorite moment or which character you'd like to see return in future tales. Your engagement keeps these stories alive and growing. This is your channel name. And until next time, stay human, stay hopeful, and keep reaching across the stars.